diaspora because their cultural as well as language and other relationships were annihilated through this forced or coerced migration. So in fact, we cannot talk about slavery or slaves as part of the diaspora. But I like when you said that even though they have been away, there's this psychological link. Even after 400 years, there is a psychological link rather than physical presence or material contribution or political influence for that matter. So I like that there is this psychological connection and longing because people don't know which part of Africa they came from. And it has been a very long time. So I think, so I just wanted to clarify that there is actually not a sizable African diaspora in the sense that we understand, and hence it is building, it's coming along, and then the transnational relationships are also manifesting in a small way. Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive.
Yes, Dr. Raj, I tell you, there are no single way to see the entire, scholarship in diaspora. Their literature came much before history, study in history came much before. What we are talking about economical studies or something, this is quite recent. But if you see the diaspora study, long before the word is used, diaspora, there are studies on various ethnic groups, which now we call diaspora. So there are literature on them, there are so many studies, but if you see the term diaspora used, it is used from 1991, and after that it became important. But there are lots of studies in, and Professor Chandrasekhar Bhatt is there. He was the director of that center, and there are lot many studies we could gather from other, other than sociology, other than, the social science, and those now we can only categorize within diaspora or transnational studies. Sir, anything you want to say?
Thank you. Thank you, Sada. You tempted me to say a word or two. Yes, we call ourselves diasporic, Indian diaspora. It's essentially, as you mentioned, after 90s, mid-90s. Till then, we have been talking to the Indians outside India as overseas Indians, same as you mentioned about overseas Chinese and so on. One of the major reasons how we get connected as a diaspora is the linkage back home with the motherland, more intensive connection. So like you have been talking about Trinidadians or Guyanese or Indians from Fiji and so on, they get connected back with the motherland essentially after the mid-90s, thanks to the technological advancement and globalization you have been talking about, because these are the forces which has led to the diasporization. This is how this globalization, which I recall Robin Cohen mentioned. You may mention it as a diasporization, because he's tempted to say that it's not just a globalization. Globalization is so intensely intermeshed with the people's migration and connectivity with the back home, which he is tempted to call as global diasporization. So these are some of the things. I don't want to add more things and take more time.
Very
anyway,
interesting
it's
point.
wonderful. Thank you.
Very interesting point. Any other question, please?
Good evening, sir.
Yes.
Dr. Om Prakash Man.
Yes, Om Prakash.
Sir, one small question, sir. We talk about how we distinguish between the state diaspora and the international diaspora. Like we say that Gujarati diaspora and Punjabi diaspora, but with the connection with we say that Indian diaspora. So within the diaspora, how we distinguish it is a state diaspora or an international diaspora? So what are the main core idea between the state diaspora and the international diaspora?
No, it is like where you look at. If you see the context, it is important. The same person can identify in many ways. Gujarat also, within Gujarat also some another place like you can say Ahmedabad also, so they can identify. See, you have to see where, which context, which situation. It apply not just Indian diaspora to every diaspora. See, they can have simultaneously all identities. Gujarati, Indian, Ahmedabadi, Muslim diaspora from Gujarat, Hindu diaspora, simultaneously they can have. They are not contradictory. They can have together all those, but they use it in a context.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other?
Sada,
Yes,
Dr.
Kari.
Sada, thank you for that. I think I was just going to say that I've seen a couple of questions, I think, in the chat box,
Okay.
and maybe without repeating my question, I think it's too deeply. I just wondered, thinking about the diaspora, whether we're looking at African. I mean, if I think about African diaspora, particularly related to let's say that the African diaspora in parts of Europe where we have had maybe a bigger connection to the UK as a as our links to colonization, but also in other diaspora that have mushroomed and grown over the years post independence, and that are calling a faraway land home, but still very much connected to the country. Particularly because I think in terms of citizenship, my country, for instance, Zambia and many others on the continent are only starting now with a dual citizenship policy. So I think in the past that a lot of people have still felt to be more, let's say, Zambian than you would feel to be part of the diaspora because of your link to the citizenship, and that gave you access. So where you were, you only had it was about documentation, and as soon as you sort of shifted, you felt yourself much more diaspora regardless of the years because of this link to the citizenship. So that's one question I wanted maybe to pose to you. Do you think that there is actually a linkage between citizenship and the feeling of being part of a diaspora for those who are in the diaspora? And then the second one, I put it out in the chat, talks about sort of this intergeneration that we have. So realizing that, the first generation that goes and in some particular cases, like you've said, the cases of India, you've had many generations that have moved, for instance, to Africa in different parts of African countries. And the country that I come from, Zambia, we've seen different generations, some that are actually, I think they would identify as you would say, more Zambian than Indian, because they have been raised in a Zambian society. They have been raised around the political systems in Zambia. And so even some have even joined political systems in my country. So in that feeling, do you feel that there is a detachment, because I don't have a better word, in how you contribute back home the longer the generations are out?
Yes, very interesting. 2-3 questions, in fact, you asked. One thing is, if the longer the generation detachment, it depends upon how they sustain the thing. For example, I told some of the very near to India, like Burma and all, they are not that linked as compared to Trinidad, which is very far for Indian diaspora. They are very vibrant. They self-generated in the means perpetuated the diasporic consciousness. So it depends upon how the people they work, they mobilize, they sustain. This is one thing. Second point, when you told citizenship and the dual citizenship back home and home relationship, it is also not so easy. For example, it can happen that the citizen from USA can have without any problem can have dual citizenship in India, but the same another citizen from Malaysia cannot. They don't want. Okay, so it depends upon the host country political atmosphere sometimes, because you have to see the allegiance. If you are, if you are in USA, it is a multicultural society, and they permit many countries they have dual citizenship elsewhere. So that is not a problem in their system, political system. But in a country where people are suspicious of immigrant, of diasporic population, they themselves they deny, in fact. to have dual citizenship. It has, in India we experienced this. So it is not just citizenship, it also depends upon their host country experience. And maybe the last question which you asked is about the longer the generation, this thing. That also again varies. It may not be, it may be. For example, in India, we have experience like the Indian diaspora in Trinidad I mentioned. They're very vibrant. They keep in touch with India, culturally very vibrant because they mobilized, they sustained, they continuously created the diasporic consciousness. But we cannot find same with the nearest countries like Myanmar, or you can say Indonesia or Thailand, or many countries where Indians have gone. So it all depends upon how they mobilize, sustain, perpetuate. So many things. Hope I answered you. Any other?
Wonderful question, Paddy.
Yes. Here we have one question, Dr. Sada. How do you evaluate the role of diaspora in policy making at the national level, affecting homeland, host diaspora? Yes, it happens. As I mentioned, diasporic population also play as a lobby group in host country, facilitating the policies of the home countries. It happened in India several times. The USA policy especially towards India, many times the diasporic population played a big role in terms of nuclear deal, you can say, or many other deals where diasporic population provided a kind of they influence the international politics of USA and all. This happens, I think, almost every countries where diasporic population are there. They work as a kind of lobby group to facilitate the policy, and Indian diaspora no exception. And the same thing happened to, if you go to Canada, the kind of policy, because of Indian people are there in most of the political power, they also influence and make favorable policy towards immigration law and all this. So it's a known fact, in fact. Diaspora population influence the policy. And same thing happens with the uh, countries which are demographically diaspora population are very strong. For example, Mauritius for India, Guyana for India, Trinidad Tobago in India. They become more, supportive of Indian policies. So it depends upon how they are positioned in a host country. Yes. Any other?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, first of all, for your so informative and interesting session. And my question is related to the types of diaspora that you had mentioned before. So what type of diaspora is it when people come to a country for studying, first of all, initially, but then they stay and they can get married with locals or established business. So what kind of diaspora is it? Thank you.
To give, yes, good question. In fact, see, there's typologically, I mentioned victim diaspora, then trade diaspora, and all. If you categorize, these are all not falling in that kind of typology, but they are free diaspora in general sense. We cannot categorize into those kind of. They are freely, in the sense. What kind of diaspora you can see? Sir, any point you want to say that we can categorize them as diaspora, certain diaspora?
Yeah, I think if there is a sizable number of those students joining together and pursue the identity of the homeland, where they migrated in a new location where they've gone for study, then there is a possibility of them emerging as a diasporic collective, a small
Generally.
way, and then go on,
Mm.
provided they retain their cultural identity. You know, those who migrated as students, if they retain their cultural identity, you know, the identity is very significant in terms of, you know, talking about diaspora. It's one of the, you know, issues of identity itself. So if the cultural identity is perpetuated by a group of people who go there, if it is one student or two students joining there and marrying somebody in the local population, they become assimilated into the local population itself. So there is no separate identity articulated. So diaspora can emerge only if a distinct identity is articulated, and it should also need a small group to sustain itself, to continue the cultural and other activities. You need to have a sufficient collective to go on. So it's a, you know, collective has to be a fairly large number. Only then.
And it will be historical, little bit, you know, period of time, longer period, so that, you know, diaspora, when you talk, it is not a current thing, it is a historical also. So it has to experience for a longer time, stay there, and this is what. So anyway, good question, but
Can you explain more? I am talking actually about Indian diaspora in Ukraine. And it is a very popular way for Indian people to come and stay in Ukraine, and they see and represent themselves as Indian diaspora, of course. And nowadays we see increasing of Indian students in Ukrainian academic universities. So that's why what my question was, what kind of diaspora they are. So I think
Professor Bhatt already observed, they are right now, they are in their potential diaspora. They have to live longer.
Right, potential diaspora in the making.
Yes, they have not completed the process to be called as diaspora. They are still there. They may come back to India also. So as I mentioned, not all migrants are diaspora. They may be potential diaspora. So we have to wait and watch. If you are in Ukraine, you have to wait another 10 years. If they stay there.
But I would like to explain more that I guess of course I haven't I didn't conduct the specific research on the Indian diaspora in Ukraine, but as I know, the first people from India stayed in Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it was like in 1991. So do you have any specific criteria about how much should be the number of such people from particular country, and how long should they stay in a country to be called as a diaspora?
See, they even longer staying is not a criteria. As I mentioned, some places we don't have diasporic identity, even they after staying for centuries. So longer is not a matter. It is a criteria, but sometimes it can also work opposite, you know. They assimilate and whatever, you know. But
one thing I wish to add, whether they are becoming the citizens of Ukraine, number one, and then have a cultural identity separate, like, you know, depending upon the group they are, whether it's Hindus, Muslims, or any cultural group, whether they have established their own cultural identity groups, and they have their fairs, festival collectively organized. That's one. You know, this is citizenship is a significant component in becoming a diasporic person. You leave the citizenship of the country where you live, you're originally from, and become a part of the citizen of another country, unless there's a dual citizenship possibilities in those countries.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes. Any other? We have some time, but
okay, Dr. Sada, is it an individual decision to feel you are part of the diaspora, or you are totally assimilated. As is that an individual, and what situation would warrant that? In other words, if you are just a minute few people, then you say, okay, well, I'm part of that country where I have migrated into, and not what I left behind. Or I feel that I don't want to be part of what I left behind. Okay. So it can be an individual decision how you want to relate, whether you want to fully assimilate or you want to, I'm not saying are there any studies. I said, can we then say this is an individual decision and not necessarily when a large number of group is formed in a foreign country that you say, okay, now I am a diasporic person. I am not what I was, right? So this is very much how an individual feels. If you are totally assimilated and you don't feel that you're losing anything culturally, economically, politically, you're just totally assimilated. You just say, hey, what I left behind, I left behind. I am where I am, I feel quite comfortable in. So does that carry any psychological issues with such individual decisions? I mean, I'm just throwing this, it's just coming to my mind.
This is very valid thing. In fact, this is how the acculturation happens. Individual decision only important. You see, intercultural marriages, interracial marriages, and all this is all individual decision, not a collective decision. This is how people lose their original diasporic identity and they assimilate. So very much you are right. If you see many of our ancestors, many who are migrated, they got assimilated, and partly it is because of circumstantial situation where they couldn't find a mass collective support to preserve their culture, and partly their individual choice, individual decision to maybe lose their culture, to adopt new culture, to intermarry, and to these are all individual only. So this is a part of the, if you see how diaspora lost its identity, this is how only it happened. It is not collective. It is rather individual only. And this is where the mass presence was not there, and collective, so collective mobilization was not there. So then individuals were left to choose their where to go, what kind of food they will eat, where to get married, all those, like that only they got more assimilated. It is very individual, we're right.
Thank you.
Dr. Sana, maybe if I could add, just thinking about definitions, and because we're in the concept of a classroom, I think those are important. I think you brought out some important references from Professor Vertovec and how diaspora is being looked at. But I'm also just thinking in the latest terms. I remember that for me, I sort of seem to recall the discussions around what a diaspora is when we started talking about remittances. As though this is what really elevated the role of who is the diaspora, because we were trying to see who are these people who are also contributing back to the homeland, as we may call it. And I think that it's good that we never got lost in definitions, like you have said, and I think that's what Dr. Raj and also Dr. Professor Bhatt is trying to allude to. Because at the same time, I mean, the diaspora could also include foreign-born children of people who consider themselves diaspora. So they may not have a very direct linkage to the homeland and have even touched the soil, but they sort of seem, they form an important part. And I think that brought my question around the generations that we have, that they're still part of it as long as they have this attachment. And I think the other thing that is also clear is that, whatever cultural linkages that they are, you can have, those that are related, for instance, to history or religion or language, for instance. I think they remain sort of very important as well in trying to understand the characteristic of that particular diaspora, right? And then also that brings then the contributions that they give. because obviously I think the light has been shined a lot on diaspora when let's say governments or their home governments have looked at them as a source of financial resource, and yet they are actually an important source of also a cultural transfer not only for their children whom they've moved with to that land, but also a cultural transfer of other people in the community, for instance, foreign-born children to other families in that diaspora. They are a representation of that culture. They are a representation of that language. I'll pick an example of Finland, for instance. And Finland, I found out very recently that they have a very interesting concept around promoting the Finnish language and the Finnish culture. Although then somebody said to me, but there are only so few Finnish people. So obviously, they have an interest in promoting that culture through a government initiative, where as a Finnish person, as a Finn living outside of Finland, part of a migrant or diaspora group or a transnational group that's not in Finland, you can get access for your children to the language and the culture, of Finland, so that tradition goes on. Because in realizing that as people are moving forward, actually, who is there to provide that? But I think in other systems, and I think about the African continent, for instance, and I think that's the same of Southeast Asia and maybe even Latin America, where we don't have these kind of resources that could be available with governments. We've taken on that. So we have the alternatives where we are promoting culture, language, history, religion, and also, other parts of the continental history that we do through the diaspora. So I think there's also something important to be said about the role that it's playing, and that has an impact, I think, on your identity as well, as Dr. Raj was saying.
Yes. No, in fact, this is very important thing. Even many governments are doing that. But if we see in India, the Indian diaspora, the strongest identity is not with religion, it is with language. We talk Tamil diaspora, Telugu diaspora. Professor Bhatt is working on regional diaspora. So regional diaspora in India are language based. It is not religious based. So sometimes the religion is not that stronger compared to language. It depends upon how it works in which context. If suppose Tamil people are more in Malaysia, they'll over dominate their language, in the sense language identity will become more stronger than the religion identity. So like that, it depends upon which language constitute largest mass in which destination countries. So it also, these are all important, and many government, they actually culturally they keep them vibrant, in the sense, if we see the Indian government, especially with the ICCR, we call a cultural Indian Council for Cultural Research. They promote this diasporic culture within India and Indian culture within diaspora. So, and even language, Indian chairs and all this, there are strong government proactive policy to engage the diaspora. So I think in many countries they have this. With even the embassies in India, I can see they promote their own country culture. So this is one way to see government engaging with promoting their respective culture. Any sir?
May I add one
Yes,
point in addition to what Sada mentioned, Paddy?
Yes, sir, please.
Sir, yes, sir.
You were mentioning about the children born in a country away from your motherland. We have a government of India, just to let you know the schemes, the way in which we connect with our diaspora is that Indians who have gone and settled outside, and especially now we have a large collective settled in the US, and children born there straight away become American children, children in the US. Now, for them, even if, the spouse may be somebody, but if an Indian person has married there and has children, can claim Indian identity and get the card. We have something called as Overseas Indian Citizenship Card. And they have a lot of, support system through this card that they can travel. They're almost like Indians, except for contesting elections in India or taking up a government of India job, or otherwise they have all facilities, investments, they can get all the facilities in India, study in India, invest in India, buy property in India, and so on. So children born to persons of Indian origin in other countries. So this is also extended to Indians outside, in terms of those who consider India as their ancestral land. Like, people, he has been quoting Trinidadian, Guyanese, and Surinamese, or in Fijians, and so on. They also can claim Indian citizenship card, overseas Indian citizenship card. It's slightly different from the dual citizenship. It doesn't give you all the rights of the dual system. This is one way the government of India has initiated, because the government of India doesn't have the provision under the constitution to have a dual citizenship according to the citizenship law here. So what they have done, the committees and recent support system from the government of India has done is to provide them overseas citizenship card, OCI. So that provides them all support system so that it can be obtained by the people wherever they are, people of Indian origin. They have to claim that they have one person of Indian origin connected to that. So this is how the diasporic connectivity has been extended in the contemporary day. Yeah, just to give you some additional information that we have.
I think we should also give some chance to students.
Yeah, please.
Maybe one or two questions to complete. 7:30 we have to complete. Okay, so if there is no question, please.
I have one.
Okay,
Not
please.
question, a suggestion. Going forward, I'm wondering, I like your matrix of this diasporic different types. Is there a way to form a matrix and studies going forward, since they're students? Maybe somebody can do a little research on the type of diaspora and their involvement, particularly in the politics, in the political side. For example, we'll see the Chinese diaspora. They are economically active in terms of investment, trade, and so on, but politically. So does the ideology of the home country influence the extent to which diaspora can contribute to the various areas? So this is what I'm, going forward, if it hasn't been done, maybe one or two research studies could look at that if there's time. But I don't know how one can do that these days. But I mean, this is just a suggestion that came to my mind. Thanks.
Yes, no, very important. In fact, your suggestion, unlike Chinese diaspora who are only economically engaged, Indian diasporas are more, you can say more encompassing, inclusive, social, political, economic, and all fronts they are engaged. So that way we have given better, diasporic homeland interrelation, you can say. So if there is nothing, we'll stop here, and thank you for listening and participating. And if there are any questions, you can write to me in this email, convener@grfdt.com. I'll be very happy to reply you. Thank you. Okay.
Dr. Sada, I think just one question which is being
Yes,
asked
please,
in the chat. It's practical and logistical if we are going to share the attendance link, but my guess was that it was going to go in the Google Classroom, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, Rakesh was not there, so we don't have chat. This attendance sheet.
Yes. So shall we share it then maybe in the Google Classroom?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, sir. Thank you so much.
It's marvelous, Sada. It's a great connectivity, and lots of thinking could be done further on the domain of diaspora studies. And Raj Bardula has brought in a couple of things which I think need to be.
She really challenged the brain. Actually, we'll be thinking.
And I missed her lecture the other day. I have been hearing her in between a number of lectures, but yes, I missed her lecture, the first lecture you had organized, and somehow, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.